Alright folks, we all came back again, and it's another Doctor Who episode. This week, Mummy on the Orient Express. That's right, we're back to punny titles. Now, I'm not a big fan of punny titles, but I'm not against them. As long as the story itself is good. And hey, I'm a big fan of Murder on the Orient Express. And the punny titled book, Murder on the Orient Espresso. So, I'm quite happy to go along with that title. Let's just hope the story can live up to it. Let's jump in and find out. Yeah, there's nothing too complex to this one. I mean, it's your classic base under siege story. The Doctor's brought Clara on one last hurrah before they go their separate ways to the space train, the Orient Express. Now, I can only see the reason for calling it the Orient Express, the sake of calling it the Orient Express, and for the punny title. But we've seen that with the Titanic and a few other things along the way with Doctor Who, so I'm not going to complain there. I'm not going to nitpick that. It's a conceit, but it's an acceptable conceit. I'll go with that. Oh yeah, and there's a mummy on it, killing people in 66 seconds exactly. And the whole reason everyone's on the train is to catch it, though they don't know that at the start. Everyone on there as well is an expert in their field, which sort of helps them, work out how to catch it. And everything suddenly changes into a lab once they realise this. But this is getting into spoiler territory, and I actually want to save it, so you catch all the twists and turns and the mystery and the murders and all that, because it's exciting. It's one of them that spoiling it isn't a good thing, I don't think. So I'm not going to tell you much. I will tell you that at the end, of course, Clara wants to stay with the Doctor and agrees to, carry on the adventures, which sort of, as I expected, ruins the big climax from last week. The best bit of last week's episode, essentially the only good bit in last week's episode, if you watch a lot of the reviewers on here, is ruined. But as I said last week, I expected that, so I'm not going to complain about it too much. Probably. We'll see when we get to Clara. Best thing about this plot, though, is that they've been sent there by person or persons unknown. At the end, no idea who sent them. So, the mystery continues. There's another great performance from Peter Capaldi. And once again, the Doctor takes charge. As soon as he does, you really see the strength of the character. And there were some great moments in this. I mean, like when he offered the jelly babies in that cigarette box. That was so cool. I really loved that. Loved the talking to himself as well. It really seemed very Tom Baker-ish. I know it's not necessarily something Tom Baker's done, but it really seemed Tom Baker-ish. Maybe it was the tone of the voice that made it seem like that. Also, his competitiveness reared its head again. It was much less pronounced, but it was still there. And actually helped the character and gave a good balance against the engineer. I also saw that the Doctor has to be practical. He can't mourn, he's got to work it out and stop it killing anyone else. He sees himself as always having the gun to his head, which is a really nice metaphor for the way the Doctor lives his life. So yeah, I like that part. We're getting to see a lot more of that sort of thing now, which is really good, especially with Peter Capaldi settling into the role. And that last bit about, is he pretending to be heartless? Or is he just having to make the bad choices? And that's a really nice dichotomy, and looking at how do you see it with the Doctor? How does he see it? I mean, I'm very firmly in the camp that he's, pretending to be heartless because it's easier that way. But I can see a good, strong argument for the opposite. And suppose we'll see as the episodes carry on. But today, good job. Enjoyed him today a lot. Possibly his best performance this so far. Possibly. So she's not gone then. Hasn't even missed a week. Figured. But having said that, let's just put that aside and look at her in this episode. And, okay, let's point out, I am still a guy, and I may not like the character. In fact, I really don't like the character. But my God, she looked so hot in that dress. Oh, yes. Okay, that's my base emotion covered. I'm back into the real game. Let's talk about the actual character stuff itself, rather than just the superficial looks. Once again, she proves herself to be a bad liar, which shows good consistency, except later on when she actually can lie easily to the woman to get her there. And she doesn't really do much in this episode. Now, don't misunderstand me, that's not entirely a complaint, because as I say, I've not been liking what the character's been doing anyway, so she's given a chance to show some kindness, and because of how she's been pulled back after the overexposure, it seemed so much better. And that dress helped. No, sorry, being professional, putting that aside. It was interesting at the end, when she decided to stay again, as we knew she would. That was such a contrived thing of her leaving. It would have worked so brilliantly if she'd actually left. But no, she's addicted to the ride. I actually like that idea. The idea of her being addicted to the ride and can't leave because of the addiction. Even to the point where she's now lying to Danny about it. So, yeah, I don't disapprove of that. I just wish they'd have approached that point a lot better and not given us such a great ending for her and then gone back on it. Speaking of Danny, I think we should lump him in with Clara here because essentially that's all he was good for in this episode. And he really did still seem really controlling. It's really seeming... I don't think I like that relationship. It's not good for Clara. I mean, I don't like Clara anyway, but I don't want bad things to happen to her any more than the narrative forces. So I'm rooting for her still. And Danny just doesn't seem like the sort of person it's good to be around. And he wants her to stop seeing the doctor, for one thing. To be fair, that is something me and Danny agree on. But that's from different points of view. And I'm not sure his is from the best of intentions. So, Perkins, as played by Frank Skinner. Meet this week's faux companion, shall we call it? Or trial run companion? Or something like that. Because he really did feel like he kind of belonged in the TARDIS crew. They've done that about 3 or 4 times this series, and I think this one's probably the most successful, actually. It was an interesting dynamic to see the Doctor and another man, rather than, the smart, strong, independent woman. I thought it worked really well. I mean, it sort of felt like a Holmes and Watson situation. And yes, let's get the Sherlock references out the way soon. But despite that, because I am fed up of the Sherlock references. We don't need them. But, okay, and as it's, Orient Express, maybe it should be Hastings, Poirot's assistant that we were talking about rather than Watson. But either way, that dynamic was there, and I thought it worked really nicely. I mean, he was caring and he was funny and he did all the right things to be the counterpoint to the Doctor. I thought that worked so nicely. He even called the Doctor out when the Doc was being, a bit heavy-handed or heartless, which was really good. And I was so sad he didn't choose to stay. I can see why he didn't. How it can change a person and he didn't want to be changed like that. I get that and I respect that. But he would have been such a good foil for the Doctor. That would have worked so nicely. I really hope the next companion is a man, so we can actually do that. It won't be, but it should be, because that was so interesting. Would give a chance to develop stronger female guest characters. But as he didn't stay, there is always a chance he could return. And I really hope he does. I don't want him to get his own spin-off. He's not a strong enough character for that, I don't think. Certainly not yet. But he could be, one of these Miss Marple or Murder, She Wrote types, where everywhere he goes there's a mystery for him to solve. And that leads him to cross paths with the Doctor again. That could be quite interesting. It would be fun to see him become a irregular character. But I'd still like to see him on board the TARDIS. Not least of which because I actually am a big fan of Frank Skinner as well. So that does help. But no, he hit all the right marks for me on this one. Pity he didn't stay around. Okay, so the mummy murdered a load of people, and Gus was responsible for the death of a fair few. But most of the cast were, just broad strokes and hardly worth mentioning. In fact, I'd say the only ones worth mentioning are the captain, who's broken down and had the fight knocked out of him, and yeah, he's a nice character. He's probably the most rounded of all the other guest characters. And there's Maisie, who's had a major breakdown, or is in the process of having a major breakdown, which Clara tries to help her through, which is a nice little subplot and actually feeds into the story well. And there's the expert, who essentially acts as an info dump for us, and once he's not needed, gets killed off. He's worth mentioning because he's such an info dump character. But, yeah, he's another one who's essentially just a broad stroke. The captain gets revitalised enough that his death means something, so that's good. It's good that we actually get to care about a character who dies. Should have said a spoiler warning there, but yeah, good that we get that. And Maisie's breakdown is a really interesting thing to watch. It's almost car crash TV territory, but it's something that seems quite true to an Agatha Christie thing. So yeah, I think that worked really well. Those two characters, they nailed spectacularly. Also, as we're talking about other things that have happened in the story, other characters from the story, I think this is the point where it's worth mentioning the version of Don't Stop Me Now, the Queen song. That was such a good version. I will be downloading that version because it was so good. I really hope I can find it online tomorrow because I loved that version of that song. That was possibly the best thing in the episode. I really enjoyed the episode, but I love my music. I love that song. I love some proper swing like that. And they married it so perfectly and it fitted the story so perfectly. But yeah, that was just amazing. It encapsulates the whole thing in that little scene. So yeah, loved that. Okay, so I'm going to call this a return to form after last week's Love It or Hate It episode. I must say my opinion on that episode varied the more I've watched it. Every time I watch it, it drops, which isn't a good thing. I praised another episode saying how good it was because of how many times I watched it. It got better and better. And last week's episode, Kill the Moon, dropped and dropped. Can't say whether this one's going to rise up when I watch it more and more or drop down, but on the two viewings I've had of it so far, I really loved it. I was well impressed. Interesting characters. I mean, Maisie, the captain, Perkins. That's three guest characters that we were made to care about. That's probably a record for this series. And the Doctor and Clara are really good as well. You haven't heard me say Clara was really good for a long time. And I'm not just talking about that dress, that dress. But no, even despite that, she was such on form this episode. Not just the acting, which is always on form, but the way she was written. And the way the Doctor's been written. It was a really good episode, this, for me. Really loved it. And hey, it featured the classic base on siege formula. I'm not going to oppose that, because I really like that formula. It worked so well for the second Doctor. Which just leaves the matter of the scores. Tricky one to score this week. I mean, it loses a mark just because Clara was in it when she shouldn't have been. But the way the character was handled in that dress, that gets that mark straight back. Also, Don't Stop Me Now, that song earns the whole load of marks for this episode. And I really enjoyed the episode anyway, so yeah, it's got to be a 9. It's a big old 9 from me. Really enjoyed it and looking forward to next week. I shall see you then. Till then, see you.